Today we begin another unit, the fourth unit of this course, and that unit is exclusively devoted to phenomenological method developed by Edmund Hussel. Basically, it is a study of the philosophy of Edmund Hussel, and all of his philosophy was devoted to developing the method of phenomenology. And the phenomenological method is very much inspiring and also the basis for the both philosophy and theology in the contemporary period. Since it is more of a method, it is not with any flesh. Therefore, it may not appear to be so not so. It is a little dry. It may appear, but that basic skeleton of the method is required, and then it will be that method becomes clearer as we go to the different philosophers later. So we go with the Edmund Hussel. In the first part, I have given something about his philosophical career, not so much about his life. He is a Jewish thinker, and he studied in 3 universities, moving from one university to another university. The reason for moving from one to the other, not because he failed in one university, but because in search of well-known professors, especially in mathematics, because he had a mathematical bent of mind. So wherever there are good thinkers, mathematical science and mathematical philosophy, he was going to those universities. So thus 3 universities studied: Leipzig, Berlin and Vienna. And then he also taught in 3 universities. So there is a correspondence for this, his teaching in 3 universities and also his philosophical career. The 3 universities where he taught was first at the University of Halle. The year, everything is given there. Because it is only easily understandable, because it's only a enumeration. So at the University of Halle, he taught, and there he was only an assistant to a professor. Although he had finished his doctorate, he did not, he has to be introduced to teaching with the help of an established professor. So he was working as assistant to Professor Stumpf. That is the case also in medical science. After the MBBS or MD, you cannot suddenly go for practicing medicine. You have to get trained under some established doctor, and that is also with regard to teaching at the university, at least in the West, although he had his doctorate. And then he taught in another university, that is at the University of Göttingen. And then finally at the University of Freiburg. Now, why I refer to this teaching at the 3 universities, more or less the time that he spent for teaching in these 3 universities corresponds to his philosophical growth. We can find 3 stages in his thought. It is not simply totally different. We find he is growing. So we find the first stage that is referred to by commentators as the pre-phenomenological period. And then a longer period he was in Göttingen, and that corresponds to the phenomenological period. Phenomenological period. And then come to the last stage, it is called the period of pure phenomenology. So there are some books that were published in these, when he was teaching in these three universities. Those books indicate the type of thinking that he had at the particular stage. It is not so rigidly compartmentalized, but we can find the gradual growth from one to the other, and then to the third as pure phenomenology, a correspondence. So the books that you can see from the notes, the books that are published at each stage of his philosophical career. Now, before we begin each philosophical career, just want a word about a kind of preview of phenomenology. It is also part of the introductory section, but then it is in fact very important because we will have some idea as to where we are moving with this preview. A preview is a technique that is used not only in the case of teaching philosophy, but also in film. In the film, Gandhi begins with his death and funeral, and then the film begins actually his life. So also we will have some prior understanding before we jump into the sea, how deep it is, or what is the area where we will be swimming. So that is what is meant by the preview of phenomenology. Not much, little only, because as years go, I am reducing because more means more difficult. Therefore, I experienced that one from the response of the students. So, preview of phenomenology. There, I just want to say something about the term phenomenology. Phenomenology, that immediately the term consists of an important term which was already existent, starting with the Kant, phenomenon. Kant had used the term phenomenon, but Kant used the term phenomenon as different from noumenon. So for Kant, phenomenon was the external appearance, the outer coating. But behind the appearance, the reality in itself. That is the noumenon. Noumenon is the reality in itself. And what is the phenomenon? Phenomenon is what appears, what is manifested, what appears. So that is the distinction made by Kant. Now when you come to Husselian phenomenology, he does not accept the distinction between phenomenon and noumenon. He does not think about a noumenon behind the phenomenon. Reality is what shows itself. Reality is what shows itself. There is nothing behind what shows itself as noumenon. If at all we can speak about in itself, what shows itself is the reality. So that distinction is non-existent in Husselian phenomenology. there is nothing behind the phenomenon as the noumenon. So that is the first point. The reality. What are we now? Now when I am sure you will immediately think about what we see. We are going to see that what we see is not what we are concerned in phenomenology, but something else. So first is enough to keep in mind that there is no distinction between the reality as it shows itself from what is behind something that shows the noumenon. So that distinction is done away with in Husselian phenomenology. Now, phenomenology is the science of phenomenon. That is actually from the etymology we can find out the meaning. The science of phenomenon. What is it concerned about? Clarification of the phenomenon. So phenomenology is concerned about the clarification of the phenomenon. Now clarification of the phenomenon means clarification of the reality, because phenomenon is not outer coating. The outer coating, and there is no inner behind the outer coating, therefore it is the clarification of reality. But the term that is used is phenomenon, and so clarification of the phenomenon. Now the specificity of this clarification of the phenomenon. There, what is the style that is followed in phenomenology? This is something which you are going to see later. That is the most important part of phenomenology. In clarifying the phenomenon, phenomenology does not follow one or the other extreme views. It does not follow the extreme. I'll explain. The extreme views, that is subjective as different from objective. Subjective. It doesn't go to neither to subjective nor to objective. Then what is that one? What it follows? We shall see. Now one word about it does not go to the either of the extremes, subjective approach or objective approach. That is the typical Western approach, either subjective or objective. Now if we look at especially the whole Western thought, especially when you come to the modern philosophy, starting with Descartes' rationalism. Descartes' rationalism, when you look at his approach, where is the emphasis? See, always this is a kind of like a pendulum. For that, there's the example of pendulum now does not make much sense, because people have not seen pendulum. Formerly, the clocks had the pendulum swinging from one to the other side. That is the way the clock is moving. So, whatever the understandable term, it was moving from one to the other. It is here, and then comes here, and then comes somewhere in the center. So that the swinging of the pendulum from subjective to the objective. Now, what do you mean by subjective and objective? I know you are not getting it. Subjective, that means subject becomes the center. I am seeing. The emphasis is not on the object. The other one is the object is important. I am unimportant. The emphasis where you place on the subject that sees, or subject that knows, or object that is known, where you place the emphasis. And that we can find the difference of emphasis. I refer to the modern philosophy. We find that difference of emphasis. For instance, when rationalism, the emphasis is on what? Where is the emphasis? On the subjective or on the objective? In fact, different schools of thought came about as a result of the differing emphasis on the subjective or on the objective. Accordingly, there are different schools of thought. In rationalism, the emphasis is more on the subjective. Because how is rationalism? What is the main thought of rationalism? Innate ideas. It is there in you. Innate ideas. And from that approach of rationalism, we find the pendulum moves to the other direction, the other extreme. What is that one? Empiricism. Empiricism, where is the emphasis? On the objective. Because the subject is tabula rasa, empty slate, nothing is there. Everything that I have to get is from the object. From the object, everything is in the object. On the object, I have to know. I am born as a clean slate. So everything that I gather in my knowledge is from outside. The emphasis on the reality outside, on the objective. So here on the subjective and here on the objective. And then, so that's called the swinging of the pendulum. It has gone to the other. And then we come to Kant. Kant is trying to reconcile, if you remember, reconcile the subjective and the objective, the rationalism and empiricism. That was what he was trying for. He was not fully successful, but at least he made an attempt towards reconciling the subjective and the objective. What Kant tried to do it. And again you find the same movement is continuing to idealism of Hegel and company. And then from idealism it moves to positivism. In idealism it is more on the subjective, and positivism is on the matter, materialism. So all those philosophers whom we have studied, they are reality in its crudeness, reality. Here it is more of idealism, Hegel. The absolute idealist is Hegel. So we find the emphasis here. This kind of swinging of moving from the thesis to antithesis, that is what was proposed by Hegel. One and then the opposite, and then the reconciliation, then the synthesis, and then it continues. This is the way thought is moving. This is the way history also is moving. And so I refer to this point only to show that in the Western philosophical approach, there can be emphasis either on the subjective or on the objective. And Kant tried to reconcile to some extent. Now when you come to phenomenology, what is Hussel is trying? Hussel wants to reconcile or to do away with this dichotomy between subject and object. The dichotomy means dividing these two realms, subject and object. Subject is the knower, object is the known. So that kind of a division, I am the knower, something what is to be known is over there. That kind of division has to be done away with. And Hussel is trying for that one through his phenomenological method. And therefore we say the clarification of the phenomenon, for that he takes an approach neither exclusively subjective nor exclusively objective. It is a reconciliation of subjective and objective. In fact, those terms do not have any meaning in Hussel, at least that is what he wanted. And therefore, he developed a phenomenological method, that is the reconciling the subjective and objective, or doing away with the division between the subjective and objective. Now, in existentialism, they are inspired by Husselian phenomenological method. What is the style that is followed? I just want to refer only to show how the dichotomy is done away already in existentialism, inspired by Husselian phenomenology. The approach that existentialism follows is not a spectator approach, but an actor approach. What is a spectator approach? Spectator approach is, I am here, the subject. The object is over there. I am trying to know the object over there. I stand outside the object. I stand as a knower, and the object is something to be known. But in existentialism, the approach is one of actor. An actor means asking the question like St. Augustine asks, who am I? Who am I? It is not what is man. I am not the questioner, and the man is not the questioned. I am reflecting on myself. It's a self-reflection. I am reflecting on what it means for me to be a human being. So there it is not, I am not standing out. I am the actor. I am in the field. I am the player. Therefore, that is the approach in the case of the existentialism, and they try to there by reflecting on the self, not as a subject outside the object, but rather I am reflecting aloud. That approach is inspired by Husselian phenomenology. And what is that approach? That approach does away with the dichotomy between subject and the object. So Hussel is trying for that one. So the clarification of the phenomenon does not follow subjective or objective, going to one or the other of extremes, but rather takes an approach that does not think in terms of subjective or objective, something that is beyond or superior to the distinction between subjective and objective. Phenomenology does not merely take a mid position, rather it tries to reconcile the subjective and the objective. It is not something midway, neither subjective nor objective. Of course, that is okay. I mean, for sake of explanation, we may use those expressions. But it is not a midway. It is reconciling subjective and objective. In the subjective, there is objective. In the objective, there is subjective. When I am considering the subjective, the objective is included in that one. So it is not in between, but rather he is calling your attention, as we shall see, that how to understand that our approach should be not simply exclusively subjective or objective, but in the subjective, the objective is included, or we can put it other way, in the objective, the subjective is included. That approach is bringing it out. So that is the final sentence that I am giving there in the second paragraph. Phenomenology does not merely take a mid position, rather it tries to reconcile the subjective and the objective. It is the methodological attempt to reach the phenomenon through an investigation of the subjective consciousness, the objective content of which is the phenomenon. Now it is not very easily understandable. Don't think even afterwards you are going to understand. Phenomenology, many people, even those who teach phenomenology, I don't think many are understanding because they will take in the empirical sense. I will refer to those points later. So here, every word is calculated, but then not that easily understandable. It is a methodological attempt to reach the phenomenon. What are you clarifying? The phenomenon. And what is that? How do you clarify? Through an investigation of the subjective consciousness And subjective consciousness does not stop there. The objective content of which is the phenomenon. So in the subjective consciousness, there is the phenomenon. The phenomenon is not outside, the phenomenon is here. So by looking at Augustine's asking, who am I? He is asking, in fact, what is human being? He is not asking in an indifferent manner as we try to solve a mathematical problem, but rather he is reflecting aloud. And when you reflect aloud on his own subjective consciousness, the objective content is there, the object is there. Object is not over there, object is here. That is what we are trying to show. When phenomenology cannot be a phenomenology and the thought that is conveyed through the third year history of philosophy. We cannot explain as we are able to explain mathematics. In mathematics, we can explain 2 plus 2 is 4. Show it very clearly. In logic also I can explain very clearly how systematically it flows. But when you come to thought, as one of my professors, when I studied philosophy, he just told, we can only take you and show phenomenology is over there. You have to feel for yourself. You have to gather the meaning. I cannot put into your mouth, put into your head. You have to feel the kind of, you get a grip of that one. Just feel it, get it. Phenomenology, unless one gets it by one's open disposition of thinking, phenomenology and the later thinkers that we are going to see, we will take merely as dead ideas to be known. So that kind of that separation will not be there if you are entering into a phenomenological style of thinking. And that is what the style that I follow. Therefore, I don't have any dead ideas to be communicated. Thought is emerging from the thinker. And the thought is not outside the thinker, it is one with the thinker. Okay. So, with this preview on phenomenology, we go to the development of Husselian thought. So, as we already told, Husselian thought consists of 3 stages, or we can roughly speak about 3 stages. And of these 3 stages, the second one is most important because that is the phenomenological period. There he developed the phenomenological method in its mature form. Not the pure phenomenology, not the period of pure phenomenology. From the title, it may appear that in the period of pure phenomenology, he comes to the core of his thought. No. The mature thought he reached at the phenomenological period, and that is the most important section for in his development of phenomenology, development of the method of phenomenology. So the other ones, the pre-phenomenological period is only a preparatory, just gradually preparing him to go to the phenomenological period. So therefore, I am not going to spend much time on that one because it is only how he gradually entered into phenomenological period. So in the pre-phenomenological period, it is the period of his philosophical infancy. Philosophical infancy means not simply the age, but rather the thought is simply growing. The thought, those who are thinkers, they find it is how to grow, which way to move. In Nietzsche, we have seen that one. Nietzsche was in total arid situation, dry, total darkness. Then suddenly some light comes. and then go this way. That is the real thinkers. So Hussel also, he had an infancy period. He does not know, or he did not know which way to move. And so that openness was there. And that we find here in Husselian pre-phenomenological period. During this period, he came to an emphasis on the objective and the slight neglect of the subjective. Now we said phenomenology is trying to reconcile the subjective and objective, not giving importance neither to objective, neither to subject, nor to the object. That is what phenomenology is trying to do. But then, before coming to that phenomenological period, he did not know. It was not suddenly, it was not a planned affair. It came to him gradually. So, that gradual growth we are just referring to. So, here, in the pre-phenomenological period, the emphasis was slightly more on the objective. Slightly more on the objective. Not as crude as empiricism. There it is, or positivism or materialism. Their emphasis is exclusively on the objective. But here, in comparison to the phenomenological period, the emphasis is slightly more on the objective. And how he came to that one. Now I know it is a little difficult. It is the method. How he came to that one. I just put in my own words, it is by chance. He went for some guest lectures by one Franz Brentano, and he went for that to attend the lectures, and by curiosity, just to know what that man is speaking, because he came to the University of Vienna, I think, and then he gave the lecture. He went there, attended. He wanted to go only one lecture, but then he continued to attend, and he has inspired him to psychologism. Brentano has inspired Hussel to psychologism. I just read. Listening to the lectures of Franz Brentano aroused in Hussel, the interest in scientific psychology and philosophy. Influenced by Brentano, he gave a psychological foundation to the concept of numbers. Numbers have an intentional being. This psychologism of his philosophy of arithmetic was criticized by Frege, and so Hussel changed his position entirely in his logical investigations. I am clarifying the same point. Okay, so Hussel was inspired or dragged into psychologism. Psychologism, you see in the dictionary what is psychologism. And psychologism with that emphasis on the psyche, on the subject, on the mind, on the subjective. And you use that inspiration to apply to mathematics. To mathematics he applied. How he applied? He says mathematical numbers are given a psychological foundation. 2 plus 2 is 4. Not because 2 plus 2 is 4 in itself. Only because some human being can understand and see it. 2 plus 2 was 4. Therefore, 2 plus 2 is 4. So according to psychological understanding of mathematics, all mathematical principles and theories have a subjective foundation. It is because humans think that way. 2 plus 2 is 4. So that way he presented, and he presented that one because, as you already saw, he was interested in mathematics, and he presented in a book that he published, The Philosophy of Arithmetic. the first book of his, The Philosophy of Arithmetic, that was published, presenting mathematical principles and theories with a emphasis on psychology. Psychology means on the subjective. 2 plus 2 is 4 because some human is thinking about it. The human understands or knows it. 2 plus 2 as 2. Not in itself. That book was reviewed by a famous thinker of that period, that thinker is called Frege. So Frege was a well-known thinker in Germany, and he reviewed this book, and then Frege criticized thoroughly the approach taken by Hussel. Criticized because it is not a personal attack. Criticize means don't take in immediately we are very touchy on that one. Criticized means clarification, more light. And a senior professor, not merely by age, but by his wisdom, when he said, he referred to some of that we cannot hold psychologism for mathematics, and he established, Frege showed it, Hussel understood. Hussel immediately, he accepted, yes, I made a mistake. That is called intellectual honesty. I refer to this point elsewhere. Intellectual honesty is when you know what is true, instead of holding fast to what I held so far, you are prepared to change. Yes, I made a mistake. It is great that if you are able to accept that one, instead of going on beating around the bush and trying to interpret it because of this and this, instead of that one, yes, I thought it was so. Now in the light of a person, from the wisdom of another person, I realize I was wrong. I'm there. It is not, that is greatness. That is real wisdom. That accept, yes, I have made yes, I understood that way. Now I understand it better. Those who are open to new light, they will grow. I had an experience for my doctoral defense. My promoter had told me, you can stand strong with what you have proposed in the thesis. He had a strong faith in what I have proposed. And then he told, this professor will attack you. Attack you means ask you questions, but you can stand strong. And I stood strong, not simply I was convinced of that one. The question he asked was, he was a very eminent professor, well known internationally. He asked, don't you think that you are using Heidegger as a mouthpiece to criticize Western thought so radically? And then I told, my immediate answer was, if I were to write the thesis once again, I would be more critical, because now I understand it better that I was milder in my critique. Only towards the end, I realized the way Western philosophy has gone astray. And then, of course, we had a long discussion. Discussion means search. And finally, he said, yes, I see there is not simply one point. I see that because I was born and brought up in the Western tradition, naturally I could not accept a critique of the Western thought. Now I realize there is truth in what you said. Publicly to announce in a big hall, when every intellectuals are sitting there, his status has not gone down. His status has shot up. He is a person who is able to accept truth wherever there is truth. That is called intellectual honesty. Hussel also, when another eminent person has brought up, not because of the person, he saw that he was wrong and immediately said, I am prepared to change. I made a mistake. And thus, he published another book, that is Logical Investigations Part 1. He published, correcting the position that he took in the first book, that is Philosophy of Arithmetic. So that was what was the position that he took was more psychological, more subjective centered. And Frege said, we cannot reduce 2 plus 2 is 4, not because somebody thinks about it. 2 plus 2 remains 4, irrespective of any person thinking or calculating about it. Without that one, it is true by itself. Axioms and principles of mathematics are true and existent, not because someone thinks about them, but in themselves. All the mathematical principles are true in themselves, not because somebody thinks about it. To relativize truth to the subject is self-contradictory, since it asserts the truth of the subject irrespective of any such relation. Now you try to understand that one. To relativize, that means that is what is done, the psychologism. 2 plus 2 is 4 because in relation to me. Therefore, to relativize truth is a contradiction, because what about that truth? That something becomes true only insofar as it is related to me. What about that truth? That truth we take it independently. Therefore, there is a contradiction in the very position that we hold about psychologism. That is what you realize that one. The meaning of self-contradiction. I give another example of skepticism. Skepticism. What is skepticism? The position that I cannot know anything for certain. That is the position. Skepticism means I cannot know anything for certain. Now, there is a self-contradiction here. There is a contradiction. What is the contradiction? When I say I cannot know anything for certain, you are saying you are very certain about this one. I am certain that I cannot know anything for certain. You are contradicting yourself. That is called self-contradiction, self-contradictory. So just as skepticism, when I say I cannot know anything for certain, you are in fact very certain about this particular truth. I cannot know anything for certain. Therefore, you are contradicting that we can know something for certain. So that, therefore, there is a contradiction. So also in the case of relativizing. What about that truth? That which is everything has to be relativized to the subject, that we don't include. Therefore, there is a contradiction. So these are the different ways Frege has opened his eyes, and thus he has changed his approach in the approach to mathematics and to also philosophy, moving slightly more towards the objective. So he was moving in the line of subjective, influenced by Brentano. Now it was criticized by the position that he took in his philosophy of arithmetic was criticized by Frege. Hussel understood he went a wrong path, and then as a result he published Logical Investigations. So part 1, there he proposes what he wanted to give in his pre-phenomenological period, with a greater emphasis on the objective. Not as crude as I said, slightly more than the phenomenological period. And that is the specificity of pre-phenomenological period. As I already told, it is only a period of infancy. He is just trying to situate himself. How shall I take the approach? And so he was open. Because of the openness, he was able to grow. And that growth we find in the next stage, that is phenomenological period. So with this I stop now.